We have breaking news out of Washington, D.C. The Biden administration, the most anti-gun administration in the history of the United States, is imposing another restriction on the American gun industry as they try to destroy the supply of firearms that we as American citizens need to protect and exercise our right to keep and bear arms. You're not going to believe this most recent antic by the Biden administration, which is just shut down exports of American firearms overseas for all intents and purposes. Let's talk about it when we get back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Down, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of Disarm: What the Ukraine War Teaches Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. All right, so major announcement by the Biden administration. They had already indicated they were going to go down this path, but they've now announced they're going to promulgate new regulations that are going to take effect on May 30th, 2024, that's going to try to punish and reduce the revenue stream of the American gun industry by at least $40 million a year by virtue of restricting exports. Now think about this for a moment. Since the beginning of time, wherever there's had nations, the ability to sell stuff overseas to foreigners in exchange for getting paid for the stuff has generally been considered a positive, going all the way back to even notions of mercantilism, where governments would work with companies to sell stuff overseas in exchange for getting paid. It's been kind of like the good idea, a positive. Yet here we have the Joe Biden administration has decided that one of America's major industries, the firearms industry, should not be able to sell overseas except to certain close allies like Ukraine and Israel and a few other countries, apparently. I don't know if they've announced the official list. But for many countries, they're going to thwart the ability of Americans to export firearms. Now, American gun companies can, in theory, still export to certain countries, but they can only do so after meeting a bunch of additional onerous regulations, making it harder and harder and harder to transact business. Now, this is all supposedly done by the Biden administration, so they say, to make it harder for guns to get in the end user hands of drug users, drug lords, terrorists, and all that. It's the usual stuff that this government always tries to justify infringing on American rights. They do so to say we need to stop terrorism, we need to stop drugs, we need to stop drug lords and bad rogue countries, and so on and so on. And that's what they're trying to say, that American gun companies selling these firearms, semi-automatic rifles, AR-style firearms, right, overseas, somehow gets into the hands of bad people who do bad things. Of course, what's ironic here is that if you remember during the Barack Obama administration, you had that Fast and Furious scandal where it was the ATF and the federal government under the Obama administration. And of course, the Biden administration is really just the Obama administration on steroids. It's the same people doing the same stuff as best I can tell. Nevertheless, the Obama administration did the Fast and Furious scandal where they were trying to sell guns or get guns sold or transferred down to Mexico to somehow cause Mexico to engage in violence against Americans. And as exchange for that, they could claim that we need more gun control in the United States. You remember that whole Fast and Furious scandal. I won't regurgitate and go over all that again, but it is ironic that it's the American government that seems to be trying to export guns to places they shouldn't, maybe more than the American civilian firearms industry, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Based on the record, I'll let you, again, form your own opinions on that topic. The bottom line is this is another example of the Biden administration trying to cut off the supply, trying to destroy the American gun industry, because if there is no American gun industry, that makes it impossible for us to be able to exercise our rights because we won't be able to buy guns, or if we do get to buy guns, they'll be at a lot higher price because the gun industry will have to make more money off you and I to stay in business, because they will have lost this business by selling these firearms by the export market overseas. Now keep in mind that one of the things that the Trump administration does, and just to give you some context here, it used to be the case that the decision about exporting firearms had to be run through the State Department. And as you know, the Department of State in D.C., the United States Department of State, has always been understood to be anti-American. I know it's ironic, but they seem to be much more sympathetic to the countries they deal with than to Americans. I think that's a long-standing understanding. So the Trump administration moved the export licensing process and all the sort of vetting that had to be done for the gun industry to sell guns overseas away from the State Department, and they moved it to the Commerce Department. Now, you would think that the Department of Commerce would be about, commerce, which is the buying and selling of stuff, right? So the Trump administration says these firearms export issues should not be in the State Department because they hate guns and they hate Americans, and it should be moved to the Commerce Department, where at least they like to engage in commerce. They like to encourage commerce by American companies, at least one would think. So the Trump administration moved this whole regulatory gestalt, if you will, from the State Department to the Commerce Department, and now the Biden administration, probably figuring out it's too hard to move it from the state back to the State Department, has simply decided to gum up the works and make it much harder for the Commerce Department to approve these export licenses to certain countries and certain people by imposing all sorts of new regulations. For example, in some instances, it used to be the case that your export license, if you're a gun company, could last up to 4 years. 4 years. Now, for many, they're going to drop it back down to 1 year. So that means every year, for many exporting gun companies, you have to renew your license every year instead of once every 4 years, adding to the cost and the burden. And as you know, and repeat this or write this down, regulations are taxes. I repeat, regulations are taxes because it requires money and time and resources to comply with government regulations, which means effectively a regulation is a tax. And that's the key point you must understand. Regulations are taxes, and therefore gun industry regulations are taxes on the gun industry. And of course, you and I will have to ultimately pay the price for these regulations because the gun industry will have to charge more money to make up for the costs they're going to have to incur by virtue of what the Biden administration is doing. So again, just another example of this anti-gun administration trying to do anything they can to hurt our Second Amendment rights and our ability to exercise them, including our supply of these firearms, because most people get guns and ammunition from gun companies. That's kind of how it works. Some people make them, but by and large, we all buy our guns from gun companies in one form or another. And this is just another reason why it's very important, in my opinion, that the Biden administration not get reelected, because we will see, if they're reelected, another 4 years of anti-American, anti-Second Amendment, anti-gun, anti-freedom policies. And that, of course, is not anything we want to see. This issue with messing around with exports of guns is just the latest example of that. So even if you're not an exporter, even if you're not in the gun industry, the reality is you will ultimately pay the price because of that's where we get our guns, is from these kinds of companies that do, among other things, sell guns, including to foreigners. Happened since the beginning of our country, and yet here we are with the Biden administration trying to destroy yet another productive American industry, along with presumably, stoves, ovens, coal companies, and energy companies, and so on and so on. So there you have it. Well, hope you learned a little bit something here today at the Four Boxes Diner. Make sure you subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on X at Four Boxes Diner, and we'll see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.